A few years ago, David Bramwell's girlfriend left him for someone she described as younger but more mature. She also said he was self-centred and too wrapped up in his own projects. To get over the heartache, David set himself another project, to go off in search of Utopia. He spent a year visiting some of the world's most inspiring communities, and along the way encountered anarchists, singing plants, a dominatrix-run kingdom, the eighth wonder of the world, and a fully functioning time machine. He came back a changed man and wrote a very funny book about it. But exactly where and what are these extraordinary places? For the last 50 years, in the centre of Copenhagen lay an anarchist community, a self-styled loser's paradise, Christiania. Christiania occupies 85 acres of disused waterways and army barracks north of the river. It first came about in 1971 when a hippie magazine circulated the city with the headline, "Catch the number 8 bus to Utopia," which the squatters and the anarchists dutifully did. Being an anarchist community, Christiania has survived all of these decades with just 3 rules. No hard drugs, no violence, and the third, which is a bit vague, is if you do stuff that pisses people off, they have to have a meeting about it. In Christiania, there are no landlords, no road signs, no street names, no house numbers, except one, Pusher Street. For decades, drugs were openly sold from stalls in Christiania. It was a lucrative business, and before long, 2 rival drug gangs built up, Bandits and Bullshit, and then Christiania became a war zone. The police came down hard on Christiania. They now patrol every few hours. But some in the community still manage to find humour in this. Today, Christiania is still one of Denmark's top tourist attractions, but it's easier to wander in as a tourist and feel like you've stepped into Reading High Street, populated by the casualties of Glastonbury. But don't be put off. Once you step outside of what you could call the city centre of Copenhagen and reach the suburbs, that's where the real beauty of the community can be found, in its architecture. Freed from tedious planning restrictions, Christiania's residents have had a field day. Walk into the suburbs of the community and you'll find houses with trees growing through the roof, houses made entirely out of windows, some that are hexagonal, and one that looks like a 1970s UFO. My friend Mark describes it as Munchkin Tudor, but it's a delight to see such an eclectic and playful array of architecture in such a small space. In contrast, back in the 80s in England, a man called Bill Heiner decided to install a fiberglass shark crashing into the roof of his house. It horrified the authorities so much, it took 10 years for Bill to battle this through the courts before he was finally allowed to keep his piece of art. What I love about Christiania is that it demonstrates when a bunch of people are left to their own devices, they don't create a down-at-heel shantytown, but they create something that expresses their individuality and their creativity. I spent a month at Christiania and got to know many of its eccentric residents. I think one of my favourite encounters was with a French lady called Helen, who one afternoon wanted to take me back to her house to show me her bare wall. I had nothing better to do that afternoon, so I went along with her.
This is my bare wall.
I was confused. I mean, there were paintings on the wall for a start.
Took us so long to clean the house up after the bear moved.
Sorry, are you saying that a real bear once lived in this house?
Of course. She was called Ricky. You could always recognize her because she would wear a little tie.
Helen made it sound as if whole armies of these creatures ambled through Christiania on a daily basis, and the only way you could recognise Ricky was by her natty attire.
Before long, she became an alcoholic bear. You know the kind.
Sort of.
We knew she had to go. So we tried the zoo, but she got so drunk she failed the interview. The neighbour just offered a spare apartment.
Apartment?
And when the taxi came...
Taxi?
She wouldn't have been able to walk there. It was miles away. I never saw her again.
Now, as we all know, the Danes are perhaps best known for making depressing television shows, depressing theatre, and depressing films. But in Christiania, at least, they've got a sense of humour. And one of my favourite stories about the community comes from 1974, when they mobilised an army of 200 Father Christmases and a giant papier-mâché goose to go into the centre of Copenhagen. This was a comment on the crass commercialism of Christmas, because what happened was the Father Christmases went into the two biggest department stores in the city, and at the allotted hour they began to liberate goods from the shelves. They took bicycles and picnic hampers and television sets and went outside and handed them out to the poor and the needy. The shop staff couldn't overpower them, there were just far too many Father Christmases, and they pretty much half emptied these department stores before the police turned up and stopped them. Christiania was fined heavily for the prank, but they had the last laugh. In 2004, the film of this, which they called the Father Christmas Wars, was voted to be in the top 10 most important works of art ever created in Danish history, which either tells us more about the originality of Christiania or just the fact that, well, the Danes have spent far too long perfecting pastries. So what did I learn? Well, if you want to make an anarchist community, be prepared for a lot of meetings. Then if we relaxed our planning laws, perhaps our cities could be a greater expression of our creativity and individuality. Hello? A demonstration in London? Over 1 million people? What, you're looking for someone to lead the crowds and overthrow the government? Well, why don't you ask Russell Brand? Oh, he's stuck inside his trousers again. I'd love to. I'll be right there.